Welcome back to Normal Island Live. I'm your host, Lewis, and I'm with the wonderful, the amazing, the spectacular Helena. Hello, Helena. Welcome.
It's good to be back. It's been a while actually since I've co-hosted Normal Island, but you knew I'd be back. I think everyone in the audience knew I'd eventually be back, and it's good to be here. Looking forward to the show tonight.
And you're busy. You've literally just been on Navarra. You're streaming after this, and now you're here with us. I don't know how you do it. I need like
The
massive
love of the
breaks
game.
from doing stressful things.
It's the love of the game. That's why I'm here.
And before we get comments saying Lewis is wearing a hat again, yeah, I wore a hat on Monday. I'm wearing a hat today. On Monday, my excuse was my hair was messy, so I did something about it yesterday, got my hair cut, and my barber has now made me look like an egg. I hate my new haircut, so you won't be seeing my hair for at least another week until it's grown out a little bit more now. So the hat is staying, guys. I do apologize. But are you ready for some stories? Let's go on, because it's going to be a big and heavy one. So, coming up today, we have the Gaza plan. Israel is opening concentration camps, according to experts. The BBC has done it again. A BBC host pushes back on the definition of these camps, and migrants are to have their benefits cut. Leaked details have showed that the Labour government are going after migrant and potentially even foreign resident benefits. So, Overton window continues moving. So let's jump onto the first story, though. So, on the ruins of Rafah, Israel plans to confine over 2 million Palestinians in what it dares to call a humanitarian city. So, Defense Minister Israel Katz openly admitted that this walled compound would be surrounded by Israeli forces with no freedom of movement, and that entry would require security screening. Once inside, Palestinians would be trapped, and eventually, all of Gaza will be herded into this camp. It's a clear plan for ethnic cleansing, masked as aid, as a humanitarian city. Now, the only way they will be ever allowed to leave is if they agree to voluntarily emigrate to another country and never come back. So, Israeli human rights lawyer Michael Sfard has said that Israel Katz laid out an operational plan for a crime against humanity. It is nothing less than that. Sfard has said it is all about population transfer to the southern tip of the Gaza Strip in preparation for deportation outside of the Strip. While the government still calls the deportation voluntary, people in Gaza are under so many coercive measures that no departure from the Strip can be seen as legal in terms of consensual. Can't get my words out. Can be seen as legal terms as consensual. Now, when you drive someone out of their homeland, that would be a war crime in the context of a war. If it's done on a massive scale like he plans, it becomes a crime against humanity, Sfard added. Now, in response to this, David Lammy, the UK Foreign Secretary at a committee hearing yesterday, said Israel will face further sanctions if they do not go ahead with the ceasefire. And in response to the comment about the concentration camps, he said the statements that you've just described from Defense Minister Israel Katz relate to very much where the IDF are located. And you'll understand that if that's what you describe as true, then I think that would be a big sticking point for getting the ceasefire. Helena, would you say that what human rights experts, lawyers, the UN are saying this is ethnic cleansing, this is crimes against humanity, but David Lammy calls it a sticking point in a ceasefire plan that Israel seem intent on obviously ripping up? What are your thoughts on Lammy's comments, and what are your thoughts on the plan for what everybody is describing as concentration camps and ethnic cleansing?
I mean, actually, I think that the key thing that was said by David Lammy there, like obviously the sticking point stuff, is him trying to be as kind of neutral as possible in his own mind about ensuring he doesn't try and say something that get picked up the press and be inflammatory. But what's really key there, the thing that I wanted to pick up was the specific part where he says, "Oh well, we'll have to consider further sanctions." What sanctions? Further from what? You have not done many sanctions. Like the sanctions that they have done have been explicitly designed to not materially affect Britain's ability to be able to assist Israel in the genocide. That's been how they have framed every single sanction or every single change in policy they've done to Israel. Hamish Faulkner in the comments has said multiple times, "Oh, well, actually, our removal of arms licenses, for example, has specifically been designed so it doesn't actually affect the ability for Israel to quote unquote defend itself." So they have been very picky about where they place their perceived pushback to Israel, insofar as we're not actually sanctioning the state of Israel with economic sanctions in terms of the fact that it gives, complete credence to, for example, say settlements in the West Bank, illegal war criminal settlements in the West Bank, which the state has given plenty of backing to already. They go, no, no, we're just going to sanction these ministers because there's the big bad people remember, rather than talking about the actual material relationship between the UK and Israel. Or they'll do it with Daniela Weiss, because it's the one everyone knows from the Netflix documentary. It's incredibly performative, and deliberately so, because they don't actually want to change their own positions with regards to Israel, because these are people who they still perceive to be their allies. I mean, they're still training IDF soldiers in the UK. They want to do it politically, internally within the UK, because they know that being pro Israel is now incredibly unpopular in the public consciousness. So they have to design policy very specifically to ensure that it doesn't actually materially affect that relationship, and only is perceived to be looking at some kind of pushback, when in reality, they've given very little pushback at all. If they continue to materially support them, that's the opposite of pushback, right? Why hasn't the sticking point, quote unquote, David, been anything up to now? I mean, quite frankly, anything since 1948, but even like the bits and pieces that we've seen since October the 7th, 2023, why have there been no sticking points up to now, as far as you're concerned, where you continue to allow all of these assistances to Israel to go through unplanned? They're now doing concentration camps, and he still can't say, let's do actual trade sanctions, let's break apart these relationships, let's actually go and try and see if we can intervene to stop genocide happening, which looks like it's happening. I mean, as on our screens, right, on our Twitter accounts, we can see these things happening. And then them openly saying, we are going to build a concentration camp, we want to ethnically cleanse you. And we can't get an actual proper statement out of any of our elected representatives on these issues.
What's interesting as well, I don't know if we mentioned this on the show on Monday, but I'll just repeat it. It's not a part of the story, but I just thought I'd throw it in. 3 Israeli soldiers on Monday actually took their own government to court. They were reservists, and they wanted to ask the court to ask the government, is what we're doing legal? And essentially, it's not up to the court to necessarily decide. It's just up to the court to ask the government to clarify what they're doing, because they said, it sounds like what we're doing is ethnic cleansing. And the government replied saying, no, that's not what we're doing. And the lawyers had to reply and say, this is what you said, and it sounds like ethnic cleansing. I find that interesting when Israeli reservists are having to take their own government to court. And like, keeping on the court theme, it was David Lammy, I think, in 2021. Might be wrong on the date, but it's not actually relevant. When he was in opposition, I don't know if you remember this, he was talking about the Uyghur genocide in China. And he was saying in Parliament that this is a genocide. And they even put forward a motion, which I think passed, which was, we believe this is a genocide and we're condemning it as a genocide, which opens up so many more questions about David Lammy's behavior since he's been the foreign secretary, which is, he's said multiple times that it's only up to the courts. Well, he was happy to be the court when he was voting that what is happening in China to the Uyghurs is a genocide, which provably, there is tons more evidence for what's happening in Gaza than what's happening in Xinjiang. And then on top of that, he wrote another article saying, you know what, I'm actually going to drag China to court when I get into government. And obviously, we know all that got backtracked on. And there was another statement which really, really pissed me off, which was when he was taking questions in Parliament. If you remember, when somebody was like, "Are you going to finally call this a genocide?" and he was like, "Oh, genocide. These words are very strong, and when we think about them historically, we're talking about millions of people being killed." And it's like, David, you were a lawyer. You know that the Bosniak Muslims, under international court, it was 8,000 that was estimated were killed, and that was declared a genocide. Genocide is not about numbers; it's about intent mixed with actions. And I don't. Is there anything that you know of? Is there anything that we can do to move this forward in any way? Is there any process in government? Because David Lammy's excuse is, we can't do anything. It's not a genocide until some court says it's a genocide. Even though, just to add this in, I'll finish the rant. Sorry, I'm ranting. As somebody pointed out in that committee hearing with David Lammy, I don't know if you saw this bit. She basically said it was the same MP who was kicked out of Israel a few weeks ago. I cannot remember her
Abtizam
name.
Mohammed.
Thank you. Yeah. She said, if this is up to the courts, actually, when the court handed down their decision the other day about the F-35 parts, they said, actually, no, this was up to the government. This is not up to the courts to decide if international law has been broken. This case is simply about, does the government have the power to do this? And yes, they do. It is up to them. And that's what she said to him. She said, it's not up to a random court. It is actually up to you. You do have the power for this. So is it a case of my question to you now, in summary, is it a case of, do we have the power to help stop this? And is there any other processes in place that we know of outside of David Lammy's, oh, we have to wait for some random international court in 10 years to decide that this is a genocide?
I mean, it does seem very difficult outside of direct action, but as we've seen from this government, they're very intent on punishing direct action and making these things impossible. It's interesting in that they've just become conservatives in terms of their ability to be authoritarian and their desire to be authoritarian with this stuff. It's also very interesting when it comes to David Lammy's political philosophy, which he said he was going to approach as foreign secretary. He said, I'm going to do progressive realism. It's not my job to imagine the world as it should be, it's to respond to it as it is. And well, hang on a minute, if you're saying that you're doing this in a progressive manner, or we're responding to it as it is, and that means that, well, America has all the power, we are the vassal state, we are the little cuck boys at the UN chair for America, we will do what they say, we will follow their line on foreign policy, we will engage in the support of colonial imperialist projects because that would be the realist approach. I'm like, well, what you're describing is neoconservatism. What you're describing is being a neocon, just in the same way that Blair was a neocon. I'm sure he would have described himself as being a quote unquote progressive realist when he followed George Bush into Iraq and Afghanistan. When the same is true right now. We are following Trump and then obviously Biden before him into this kind of tacit, complicit, and continually unwavering support for Israel. We have soft condemnations, but in terms of how they actually approach it through policy, very little has actually changed, as I've said, materially in any sense. And so when you look at the current Labour Party, what the only heuristic outside of the allegiance with who they believe to be politically powerful actors is essentially to, well, will we lose an election? As far as I can see, the best way that we have of ensuring that people like David Lammy and the Labour Party are forced to change course is to inflict electoral consequences on them. And outside of the direct action route, I mean, we're going to have to wait until the next kind of round of local elections, but that's happening in February next year. That's quite a while away. But even so, if we want to make sure that we punish these people for doing these things that are so politically and so morally reprehensible, then at the ballot box next time round, when a lot of Labour seats in councils are going to be up for grabs, we need to make an explicit desire to make sure that these people get punished for supporting a party that's allowed our country to complicit in genocide.
I think I think as well, just to speak about direct action just for a second, because many people have pointed out this week about suffragettes and how some of the MPs have been celebrating the movement this week, and they've done it pretty much every year at the time that it comes. Yvette Cooper, I only learnt this yesterday after doing some research. Yvette Cooper has a picture of Emmeline Pankhurst on her wall in her office in Parliament. Emmeline Pankhurst was, by any definition, today's laws, a terrorist, right? She endorsed bombs on property. She did not endorse them on people. She endorsed violence. She assaulted a police officer. She spat at a police officer. She smashed windows. She encouraged others and celebrated others smashing windows because they turned around and basically said, what we want is not happening, so let's go militant. Let's do direct action. And, arguably, they did what would be considered to be 100 times worse in terms of the actual level and consistency of any sort of vandalism and violence against the state than Palestine Action has done, or any other direct action group has done in recent modern UK history, right? So how can Yvette Cooper have a picture of Emmeline Pankhurst on her wall and literally say everything that she did was justified? And just to add, while I was doing my research yesterday, she celebrates her in the opening introduction of her own book and celebrates everything that she did. Yet by today's standards, with everything that she did, she would have been in prison for decades, not just the up to maximum sentence of 14 years for supporting a terrorist organization, aka Palestine Action, but on top of that, the endorsement, incitement of violence, of damage, of property. And she carried a lot of these out and organized a lot of them. So how can we sit in this world? How can they sit there and say what they're doing is at the level of a terrorist organization when they actively support somebody they would define as a terrorist by today's standards, right?
It's because they're power hungry. These people are power hungry. They're obsessed with getting into power and exercising the power when they get there. It's as simple as that. They have no principles. They don't believe in anything. They have no idea of what they want to do with society or what society should look like. They want power for the sake of power, and they will wield it, and they will virtue signal about people who they believe to be heroes and then completely contradict those values when it comes to implementing it when they are in that position of power that they wanted to be in. It's as simple as that. She's just the same as Keir Starmer. She's the same as Morgan McSweeney and Pat McFadden and all of these other people whose only sole goal is power for the sake of power. And anyone who is willing to do that stuff specifically to gain power is the kind of person who should not be in a powerful position in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. But staying on the theme, let's quickly move on to the next and related story. I am about to show you a 5-minute clip of a radio interview. So sorry, it's not very visually stimulating, but I promise you the audio is auditorially stimulate. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. But let's just quickly explain. So, meanwhile, Baroness Helena Kennedy is a Labour peer and one of the most prominent and well-respected human rights lawyers and barristers in the country. So when she dared to speak out the truth on BBC Radio 4 yesterday, calling Israel's scheme a concentration camp, presenter Sarah Montague pushed back. So let's just have a look at this 5-minute clip and let's see what we think when we get back.
And last year served as an expert on the panel convened by the International Criminal Court to examine the situation in the state of Palestine. I asked her whether she thought the plan was legal.
This plan is not legal. The Geneva Convention that was created after the Second World War made it very clear that to force transfers, which is essentially what's going to be happening here, of protected persons into a territory that is occupied by the occupying power, those forced transfers are absolutely prohibited by law.
OK, now are you referring there to people leaving Gaza, being encouraged to leave Gaza, or to this idea of having them all moved to the south of Gaza, to Rafah?
Well, it would actually cover both, because when you talk about, for example, moving people, encouraging people to make the choice of going to another place, they're really talking about other places in the region, because we're all dealing with issues with regard to immigrant arrivals. No visas, as I understand it very much, are being offered to Palestinians just now. So we're not talking about going to Europe. We're talking about insisting that neighbouring countries like Jordan, which already has a huge number of Palestinians living there, we're talking about Egypt, and pressure is being applied to those places using aid as the pressure and military assistance as the pressure to take in people. And the people are being coerced. So when you talk about choice, people can make a choice to build a new life somewhere else. This is no choice when people have been moving up and down Gaza with the regularity of an elevator. And these people have been displaced, they've lost huge numbers of their families. And the idea that there is free choice in the business of moving somewhere else is not the reality.
The Defence Minister, Israel Katz, said that humanitarian city would be run by international bodies, not the IDF. He didn't specify which international bodies.
It certainly won't be the UN, because you know that Israel has withdrawn all of its support for the United Nations in any form. And I suspect that we're going to see America going down a similar road in support, lack of support for the UN. And so what I'm worried about here, we already have heard Israel Katz saying that Israel itself, the IDF, would be able to determine who went into the camps and who might be allowed to exit the camps. And exiting this camp would be about, by choice, going off to live somewhere else, meaning somewhere in the region.
I mean, I'm asking you if this is legal, but in a way, it's almost irrelevant at the moment, isn't it? Because doesn't this show that the law is powerless?
Well, one of the things about law is that, of course, it's a social contract. Law has to be bought into by the people who are the signatories to these treaties. And what we've been seeing recently with Russia's behaviour with regard to Ukraine, with Israel's now behaviour with regard to the conduct of its war, where it starts off with self-defense being accepted and agreed, being a necessary part of a nation's right to security, but to take it to a level where you force people out of the places that they live in and force them into camps, a concentration camp, is absolutely not in accordance with law. But it seems that law doesn't matter anymore. We're seeing the unravelling of the international consensus around that rules-based order that was created after the Second World War. Certainly, I want to see the United Kingdom being much more vocal vocal in its condemnation of this and to call war crimes what they are. We're listening to the screams of the people who are being torn out of the places in which they have lived and lived with their families as refugees already.
You use the words concentration camp. Do
Yes.
you mean that? Because our understanding of concentration camp is surely very different from this.
Why?
Because concentration camp people were starved to death within a concentration camp.
Well, we're witnessing starvation at the moment with very few people. I mean, we're hearing from medical professionals and experts in the issue of malnutrition about the impact on the well-being of infants and children.
So you have no doubt this is genocide, do you?
I have now moved to a position where I believe that we're now witnessing a genocide taking place before our eyes. And I was very reluctant to go there because the threshold has to be very high. There has to be specific intent for genocide. But what we're now seeing is genocidal behaviour. Listen to the voices of those who go out and give their volunteered help. And what they're seeing is so shocking.
You want the UK to say more. On a legal point of view, if nations are silent, are they complicit?
Yes.
In legal terms?
We become complicit if we do not make it very clear that we oppose what is taking place. Macron is here visiting the king at the moment, but I hope opportunity is taken to discuss as soon as possible what is being contemplated here. And what is being contemplated is the creation of a mass concentration camp and using the persecution of these people to have them make the false choice, the coerced choice. We now know about how coercion can operate on the psyche of people, that they end up feeling so hopeless and so in despair that there is nothing for them, that their life is over unless they leave. I'm speaking here just now not only as simply somebody who's witnessing something horrible, but I'm also speaking as a lawyer who knows what international law sought to do. But you have to have the big players in the world commit to it.
Baroness Helena Kennedy. Well, there are different definitions of a concentration camp. According to Britannica, it is an internment centre for political prisoners and members of national or minority groups who are confined for reasons of state security, exploitation or punishment.
I'm on mute. Dramatic moment, not really landed. I'm going to do the whole thing again, which is, did she just describe at the end of the video the exact definition of what is happening right now? I'm confused by the pushback. I don't think it was anything too big or too heated, but it's the idea of, I understand as a journalist, you have to, push back, argue points a little bit, perhaps say, not even give the Israeli talking point, but just say, does this meet the definition of what people might think of concentration camps from history? Ask more questions, pull more information out. It just sounded like she was just pushing back. And I saw people saying and noting it in the comments because it's the moment that stood out for me as well, which is when she just goes, why? And I think it's a very powerful moment. I think people have the right to, point out that, people like Baroness Kennedy has said that it's a high bar. I have now moved my position. And many people can turn around and say, well, we've been saying this for a while. But I think it's more important to say, if she's now moved her position and she thinks the high bar has been met, we should take that and we should run with it, because it's more important to fight the genocide than it is to point fingers and say, look, we were right. Helena, do you think at the end of that clip that the definition that she gave out at the end from the Britannica was what we've all been seeing and what we have heard from what they're about to do?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. What we're seeing here is two very, very distinct pieces of motivated reasoning. The first is around concentration camps, right? So when people hear concentration camp, and why this BBC presenter pushed back so strongly here, is that we are taught in the UK, in the West more broadly, but specifically in the UK, that the concentration camp is where Jews were put and where Sinti and Roma and Slavs and communists were put during the Holocaust in Germany. They were put in concentration camps. That's what we perceive concentration camps to be. Now, of course, there were a lot of concentration camps that the Nazis used in Germany and Poland, in places like Croatia as well, the independent state of Croatia, during the Second World War, right? But the concentration camps were specifically as described by the Britannica. What they are separate from is extermination camps, which the Nazis also used. Where people went, where they actually were kind of industrially slaughtered as part of the Holocaust, right? All of these different groups of people, predominantly Jewish people, was specifically in the extermination camps, which is what you hear when you talk about Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz and Birkenau and Jasenovac and places like that. So what's important is that there's a really clear distinction between what a concentration camp is and what an extermination camp is. But in popular understanding in the UK, we only think of concentration camps encompassing the latter, the extermination camp, because some of these were previously concentration camps that were converted into extermination camps once the final solution was drafted by the Nazis. Whereas the actual term concentration camp originally comes from a concept that was designed by the British for use in the Boer War. We are the originators of the concentration camp. It is the British who are responsible for the creation of the original kind of usage of the term concentration camp for how we treated people during the Boer War. And so we don't want to admit this. It's motivated reasoning to ascribe the uses of concentration camps and try and pigeonhole the usage of such to only the real worst examples. It's where you had the concentration camps that became extermination camps in Nazi Germany. We don't want to admit that the British were the people who pioneered this kind of human injustice. And so we want to completely forget about it by only linking it to the worst examples. That's motivated reasoning part one. The second piece of motivated reasoning is that lots of people, especially our human rights liar-in-chief, Keir Starmer, they know full well what human rights law is surrounding genocide, as was pointed out very clearly by the Baroness there very eloquently in that little clip. And under the Genocide Convention, if you believe genocide to be happening, you have the duty, you have the obligation to attempt to stop it from happening. That happened in Bosnia. We intervened, NATO intervened in Bosnia to stop a genocide with boots on the ground, no less. Many people, of course, are very aware of the bombing campaign in Serbia during the KLA's campaign against the Serbian government, but people aren't quite as aware of the fact that during the Bosnian genocide, there were NATO troops on the ground to actually try and stop what happened with the siege, the denial of food, the concentration of people in Srebrenica, right? Like literally the kind of things that Israel is doing right now to the Palestinians was being done by the Serb Republic in Bosnia, by Radovan Karadzic, by the Serbian generals at the time during the Bosnian genocide. These are very, very similar situations, and we felt like we had to intervene to try and prevent the genocide from continuing in Bosnia. They know full well that's an obligation of the Genocide Convention, so they cannot admit it. They cannot admit it in Palestine, otherwise it would show that there is an obligation to go and stop it by intervening. And we don't want to intervene because we don't want to piss off Israel. We don't want to seem like that we are undermining US hegemony, the control of US interests by Israel in the region, right? There is a power interest in us having relationships with Israel, and we don't want to undermine that. As soon as we admit that it's a genocide, suddenly we're forced to intervene. That's motivated reasoning part two. And that's why you're seeing so many people from our side of the spectrum being proven right on this one, because we don't have that same power relationship with Israel that people like David Lammy and Keir Starmer do. They don't want to piss off who they see as their allies, so they refuse to admit that that what is everyone can see is happening, because they know what the obligations would be.
Yeah, I was reading recently as well about the idea of the history of genocides or things like this happening, where there is a repetition of history, where governments do know what is actually going on, and they don't want to define it because it means they would be forced to essentially intervene, which is a sad part of history. And I feel like I mentioned this on Monday, and it goes to your point about the idea of how we kind of teach it wrong and how people have been conditioned to think of concentration camps, extermination camps, that we've essentially failed to teach World War II in many ways, which is when we invoke the word genocide, we can only ever associate that word really as an average person in the UK growing up here as relation to the Holocaust. So unless it's that bad, you can't really invoke that word without being essentially called hysterical. Now, with Baroness Kennedy, who is very popular within these spaces, people know her in politics. I'm just wondering, do you think that this could maybe getting to a tipping point where it is actually going to become too much because this is a very establishment figure, a Labour peer in the House of Lords? She's been appointed by multiple governments into multiple roles. Could this be a swing? Or am I just being naive and essentially probably nothing's going to change? Like, who else needs to essentially come out? How many more people? Because we've even got Tories saying it now, right? We've got Tories literally standing up. I can't remember his name, the Conservative MP who got up a few weeks ago, and then she said, I was wrong about Israel. I was wrong. And that's happening now, but they have no power. They're in opposition.
Yeah, people like Kit Mulcahy.
Is this a thing, or do we need more?
I don't think there is any amount of people that will sway the government on this issue because it's all gone too far. They know that they're complicit. They know that they have crossed the line in terms of giving material support to a genocide, right? There's no backtracking. You don't get to go oopsie takesy backsies over providing material support to genocide, right? They have to double down. There's nowhere else for them to go. The avenues for exit have been shut, and they've been shut for months. They've been shut for over a year. That's the reality, is that there have been genocidal policies, genocidal statements, genocidal actions by political members of the Knesset, members of the government, by the IDF and the generals as well, right? These things have been allowed to happen. They've been done in full view. They've been done in such credibly documented ways since the very start of the genocide 21 months ago. And our government, both Conservative and Labour, have given full support to every single one of these actions and have not wavered in their continual alliance with Israel during this period, still provided training for IDF soldiers, still provided refueling and RAF Bryce Norton, still provided surveillance flights from RAF Akrotiri. All of these complicities have been allowed to happen whilst the genocidal acts have been committed and the genocidal statements have been made. There is no amount of pushback. There is no amount of dissent that will force the government to change their position. Because as soon as they change their position, then they will have to admit that they were wrong. And they were wrong at a time when there was plenty of calls for them to stop doing this. In fact, Crispin Blunt threatened Rishi Sunak and David Cameron with taking them to the International Criminal Court, I believe it was, for the International Centre for the Justice of Palestinians, right? So with the ICJP, he was a signatory to this. And he said, if you don't change position on this, I'll be forced to try and see that you get at least some amount of legal pushback for the things that you're doing. And that didn't get them to change their positions at all, because again, as soon as they admit it, they know they're complicit. And that's a big problem for them. And that's why I don't think we'll see any kind of change on this until they pretend that they were all against it 10 years down the line, when we do get the confirmation from legal sources internationally that what was committed was a genocide. But by then, it'll be too late.
Well, I hope you're wrong. That's all I can say. But you are probably right. I will happily remain naive that every time we get a new big voice coming out that it's going to change something. I will then probably be disappointed, but I'd rather, I think, stay naive and then just potentially just say nothing's ever going to change it. Because I think we have to, I'm going to try and remain with some hope, even though I think many people, even myself at times, will say that's completely naive. But just one tiny little question. How many news outlets do you think covered this story that I found?
My guess is it's going to be like Open Democracy and The National and nowhere else.
Yeah, so National Scott covered it, and Middle East Eye, that's it. No one else has picked up. I just checked 5 minutes ago just to make sure I'm still being accurate to time. No one else has picked up this story. I happened to find some random person which had 500 likes on a TikTok video, happened to clip this morning, which is why I chose to do the story, because nobody's covered it. And then later in the day, the National Scott published about it. The journalist who covers that, Xander... he's quite good. He covers a lot of these stories. I'd really recommend looking into some of his work. But yeah, that's pretty much where we're at. But I'm going to quickly share a tiny little story with you guys. It's not going to have any follow-up. I just wanted to share this as a moment of not even hope, but just the idea of resistance, not just from the UK or anywhere else in the world, but actually from Israel itself, because I don't often feel like we highlight Israeli voices that much who are standing up. And I feel like if you don't know this person, he needs an introduction. So there is a Knesset lawmaker in Israel. So meet Ofer Kasif. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I do apologize. He is a Jewish Israeli MP, MK, with the Hadash party, known for his unwavering support for Palestinians. He is a conscientious objector. During the first Intifada, he was jailed 4 times for refusing IDF orders. He is a self-proclaimed explicit anti-Zionist. He says Zionism is a racist ideology promoting Jewish supremacy. He has been politically persecuted. He was barred from running in 2019, but then the Supreme Court actually overturned it. He referred to another Israeli lawmaker as a neo-Nazi. That was their excuse for saying that he couldn't run. He has been suspended from the Knesset at least 3 times for 45 days in October 2023. That was specifically for saying what is happening to the Palestinians is ethnic cleansing, and said that the Israeli government were carrying out pogroms. He had a 6-month suspension in November 2024, and he also faced an attempt by 85 5M case to expel him in February. This is for his series of comments basically advocating, obviously, continuously for Palestinians. Now, Kassif advocates for Palestinian freedom. He actually supported South Africa's ICJ genocide case. He literally shared and signed a petition within Israel, and that was part of the reason why he got suspended on, I think it was the third time. And he calls resistance to occupation freedom fighters. And now he's just been suspended again while he is already currently suspended. He posted this on social media, which has led to a suspension. So he posted, this month, exactly 86 years ago, the Central Office for Jewish Immigration was established in Berlin with the aim of encouraging voluntary emigration. So in this picture, it was Jews waiting for voluntary emigration in Vienna in 1938. I think the graphic has been mixed up. I do apologize. That was my fault because I uploaded the graphics. Apologies. Here is the tweet if you just want to have a quick look at it. And I think it's important that these people highlight it. This guy has been elected by the people of Israel to the Knesset, and he continues to get suspended and continues to stand up for what is happening. And he's also a professor in Tel Aviv. He's not just some radical activist. He is an academic, and he's dedicated his life to this. And I just feel like it was important to highlight this person when I saw this story today in Israeli media. Now, let's move on to the next story, something more domestic. The UK government is considering restricting migrant access to benefits in a move critics see as a punitive and performative rather than evidence-based. So the proposal aims to deter small boat crossings by cutting financial support, including potentially universal credit and even pensions for foreign nationals. So we're not just even talking about people who are coming over here on the boats. We're talking about the potential for people who are foreign nationals, residents in this country, living, working here, maybe getting cut off or having their benefits reduced. This comes as Prime Minister Keir Starmer seeks a one-in, one-out returns agreement with French President Emmanuel Macron, allowing Britain to send migrants back to France in exchange for limited intake of asylum seekers with UK ties. Obviously, he was visiting yesterday, did his little speech. Don't know if you guys saw it. But again, just more of the Overton window moving every day, trying to win over those voters that they're never going to get. Ministers are arguing that welfare entitlements and legal work act as pull factors to the UK, despite the fact that asylum seekers currently live on as little as £9.95 to £49.18 a week. A leaked memo from the Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner earlier this year suggested tightening welfare access and increasing the immigration health surcharge, revealing a bipartisan drift towards restricting migrant rights. Meanwhile, Tory backbenchers are currently pushing for amendments to block access to disability benefits for anyone but UK citizens. Now, such proposals risk violating reciprocal international agreements and further marginalizing already vulnerable people. Framing migration as a burden rather than a humanitarian reality continues to deepen division and ignores the root causes of displacement. Now, while doing so little to solve the crisis the government claims to address, they are doing nothing to address the root cause at all in any way. In fact, you could even argue, relating to the two first stories, that as Israel continues to do what it does, it continues to further destabilize the Middle East, and we all know how that affects migration. Helena, what are your thoughts on these potential proposals? Again, nothing has been officially publicized. These are all just from leaks and a series of leaks from the Eye to the Daily Telegraph, all saying that they all have confirmation that this is a serious consideration.
I don't know if you saw Mike Tapp, a Labour MP, against Zoe Gardner on Newsnight the other day when
I
they were
did see that
talking about
clip.
this issue. Yeah, they specifically said, Mike Tapp's line was, well, I'm not cowed by ideology in this. I just want pragmatic solutions. So, okay, right, I'm going to remove ideology from my response. I think you covered a lot of the inhumanity about these kind of policies that I agree with, Lewis. So I'm just going to talk about the pragmatism of this policy and why it's stupid, right? Even if you wanted to reduce pull factors, for example, the issue, of course, is that most of these migrants don't have pull factors. They have push factors, which is the fact that they are fleeing conflict. They are fleeing persecution. They are fleeing violence. They have been, again, as you point out, from regions that have been destabilized. They're coming to the UK, as has been found out when you actually watch interviews with these migrants, for one reason and one reason only. It's because they don't speak French. they speak English. This is the country they are most likely to be able to integrate in. And when you look at surveys done of migrants for the reason for choosing the UK, language is mostly at the biggest reason outside of family connection. And most of those family connections are because they came here previously because they spoke the language. So just by removing the benefits, by removing access to all these different things, that's not going to change the necessity of people to flee war zones, for fleeing conflict zones, looking for safe refuge in countries that do not have these issues, such as a lot of European countries. And of course, if you're going to come to Europe, you want to be able to speak a language that you can actually speak so you can integrate into society, because these people do want to integrate. They don't want to be outcast from society. They are very much happy to integrate once they get here. This is not going to change them, right? If migrants, right, if asylum seekers can flee Yemen into Saudi Arabia, where their ability to try and remove pull factors is shooting them, and they still come across the border, which they do, despite the fact that Saudi Arabia shoots migrants, they kill them, and yet they still want to seek asylum in Saudi Arabia. Stopping some benefits is not going to push them away from the United Kingdom. What it will do, though, is exacerbate all of the problems people actually have concerns with over migration. Right? When it comes to people who are seeking asylum, what do people have issues with? They have issues with distortions within the labour market. They have issues with, for example, the likelihood of crime or them going in underground into the black market. If you remove these people's ability to be able to live properly by slashing their welfare or access to healthcare, and they can't survive because you've given them such meagre scraps to live on, they're going to start working under the desk for Deliveroo or for Uber Eats, right? They're going to seek out black market work in the gangs or in the drug trade. You are going to push these people underground. And so you're going to exacerbate all of the criminal activities that people associate with asylum seekers, which are part and parcel of the fact that we have given them no choice. They come here, we don't want to break the Refugee Convention, which is probably going to be the next thing on the chopping block when this, of course, doesn't work, because these things never do work. And when it does happen and these crime rates go up and we see more instances of asylum seekers going underground and getting involved in gang-related activity or within the drug trade, they're going to blame somehow that these asylum seekers are naturally bad people, they're from alien cultures, rather than the fact that we literally push them there by giving them access to nothing else, right? Is a silly solution, which again fundamentally fails at acknowledging the reality of this, which is people will migrate, people will move, people will seek asylum, people will be displaced, right? And you cannot stop them from doing so. All you can do is mitigate the factors that happen when they do that, and you mitigate them by ensuring that you don't give them incentives to do bad things. And unfortunately, making them so immiserated that they have no choice but to enter into the underground is not the way of doing that.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that I'm sure you've probably picked up on this too for the last maybe month or so, but there's been drippings of it in the media for months. This whole new targeting of Deliveroo drivers and Uber Eats drivers, they're focusing on this like illegal work. And now they're trying to, from what I've seen from the propaganda, is trying to make women feel scared of getting a food delivery or a grocery delivery to their house from these services because it's evil, fighting age men, who are secret asylum seekers working illegally, delivering their food. Have you seen a lot of this coverage recently?
Chris Philp did a video of himself looking at like Deliveroo, didn't he?
Oh, did he? But again, what's funny about these? I don't understand who it's going to win over. I truly don't. I don't think Labour have done some things regarding all of their policies, right, which in many ways are supposed to appeal to people. And I get it, right? They're in the first year or just past the first year of having a really shitty 14 years handed to them. And you would have thought that not just necessarily in the general polling of how popular they are, but just on certain issues, right? We poll issues about specific things trusted with the economy, immigration, yada, 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 education. And nothing's changed for them. None of these policies or even the idea of a policy has really changed anybody's opinion other than I don't want to support the Labour Party anymore. And are they seriously going to gamble on the idea? This is more of a rhetorical question because we know that they are. They seriously gambling on the idea that going this hardline, going, more conservative, more right wing than pretty much most conservative parties have ever even gone when it comes to this topic. And I agree with you. I think they genuinely would come out of the Refugee Convention if they thought it was somehow going to help them. I just don't understand this pathway. Are they really gambling on this? Because everything suggests that they're only losing more voters on the left. And not only that, I've got people who I speak to, again, anecdotal, who are very unhappy with Labour, and they have the potential to go back to them, right? If they do the right thing, if they start making the right decisions. the people that I'm speaking to now who are in that position, it's like, no, this is done for me. I cannot go back to any form of this Labour Party because what they're doing is irredeemable. And again, this, in terms of the money, in terms of the cost, it's not really going to make any sort of actual fiscal difference that's going to have any significant impact. So I think, is it safe to say now, Helena, a year in and a few days, that nothing is going to change their path, with the exception of the odd Labour rebellion on policies that they have the power to vote on?
So the polling company More in Common continually do a weekly poll of where the public's issues are and the salience of those issues and what they perceive to be the most important issues facing society, right? And it's recently, in the past few months, that immigration is now second. It used to be the economy and cost of living, then the NHS, and then it was immigration. And now immigration is second and is higher than the NHS. Obviously, there are some reasons for the fact that there's been funding to the NHS, but the big reason is that the salience of immigration policy is back at the top of the headlines again, having been close to there during the time when Rishi Sunak was standing on a podium that said "stop the boats" in big words. And what Labour are doing, rather than saying, well, let's try and divert attention away to a thing that we know we're failing on, they can see they're failing, which is why they are looking at all these different policies that aren't going to work, because they want to up the ante to ensure that they can quote unquote be successful, even though I don't think they will be, because they think that they're salient. Rather than leading the public, they're letting the public decide what the salient issues are and then following them, which is not how you're supposed to do politics. And what the Tories did, when they tried to make this immigration issue, the small boats issue, be the biggest issue, and then they failed in it miserably because they didn't actually reduce anything or stop any boats at all, because the Rwanda policy was a dumb gimmick that was never going to work, whilst also being monumentally abhorrent in lots of ways as well. It was that all it did was make people think immigration is an issue and the government's failing, so we're going to vote for Reform UK. And Labour are making the very same mistake. They're making the exact same mistake because, of course, as has been pointed out by people like Zoe Gardner, every policy they've tried has failed. Every single policy has failed. It hasn't worked. Very likely none of them will work. They are making it a politically salient issue and then failing on it. And then all that's going to do is, again, push away progressive voters and allow Reform UK to say, well, look, the government say that they want to do things about immigration and they're failing. They can't even get their central things right because everyone knows the Border Security Command is just a bunch of fucking pablum. Everyone knows this is nonsense. It's just words they do to decide to say to make people think that they have a plan when they don't have one. Keir Starmer went on stage at fucking Interpol and said, well, our plan for dealing with the small boats crisis that we've hired dogs that can sniff dinghy rubber. And I'm like, well, at this point, just fucking hand the keys to number 10 to Nigel Farage already, because you're trying to enable a voter base who won't believe you when you say you're trying to do something and will hold you accountable when you inevitably fail. It's a totally dead strategy, even if you genuinely believe, and I think that there is plenty of truth to the idea that Labour believe that they have lost their way in terms of the natural voter base over the issue of immigration. But are you going to win these people back by failing? No, you're not.
Just one quick question, perhaps it will be quick. In terms of the hypotheticals of repeated parties failing, let's just say the Reform Party come in. I think they'd only ever be able to deliver on this issue if they essentially went down the route that Trump has gone down, alligator Alcatraz, basically twisting or just getting rid of laws that protect people. Do you think that, like, yes, people are, immigrations rose up on the issues in the polling. Do you think that the manufacturing of consent, what Trump has been able to do for this to be allowed in the US and still have the support that he does, do you think that it already exists in the UK, that
Yes.
a Farage could get away with what Trump is doing?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. I mean, this alligator Alcatraz stuff, this isn't new, right? The idea that somehow this is a brainchild of Trump, no, this is Australian politics. The shit that was happening on Manus Island or in Papua New Guinea or on Nauru at the best of the Australian government was terrifying. People sewed their mouth shut in protest to the inhumane, disgusting treatment by the Australian government for asylum seekers in Australia. And again, did it stop people trying to seek asylum in Australia? No, it didn't. But I do believe that there is going to be plenty of political will for this to happen because, again, they will have seen multiple parties fail on this and they will want there to be a solution that they believe will work. And as every single more extreme solution continues to fail, and just like what will fail in the United States because people will still seek asylum in the United States because they will continue to want to move country to flee persecution, they will want to up the ante even further. There is only a doom spiral awaiting the government that wants to try and up the ante on this issue. And I believe that's where we're going to end up as well.
Yeah, I was asking the question because I've already answered it for myself anyway. I think the consent is there too. The way some people that I have met, and this is not a small handful, it's into the, I'd safely say hundreds. I think people would be ready to be a part of a firing line for in a certain section of the population if they were given the opportunity to, which is a very dark way to jump off into the comments from people in a second. But I just want to quickly say, just remember that Turn Left Media is a independent organization and we rely on everybody's support to keep us going, and we've got lots of amazing supporters and we want to thank you for that. But if anybody does wish to contribute towards us, which we have done some amazing things this year thanks to everybody else's support, has been paying for trains and hotels so we can go to events and interview some amazing guests. If you would like to contribute as well, you can go to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. You can join our Patreon, you can do a one-off donation, or you can even use the, if you're watching on YouTube, the YouTube memberships, either give yourself or gift memberships to others. And we've got some more amazing plans coming up this year, and we can't wait to share them with everyone. But now, let's go to the comments and see how everybody feels about some of the things that we've been talking about today.
What I would like to do before we move on to
Go
comments,
ahead,
what
go
I
ahead.
will say is that obviously we have loads of negativity on the immigration issue. What I'm going to try and say an addendum to that last piece, I want to point out that there are solutions, right? You can do safe and legal routes, and you don't have to announce it. You don't have to theoretically piss off voters by saying we're opening the doors for migrants. You can just open the safe and legal routes. People, as long as the small boat numbers go down, that's all that people care about. As long as the small boat numbers go down, you'll be able to get away with it. There's an off ramp. There is an off ramp to the dangerous future and the dark future that we're going to, and it's through safe and legal routes. And again, you don't have to have fanfare. All you need to do is make a way of people getting here that they don't have to rely on coming via irregular means. So if you're listening, Yvette Cooper, which obviously you're not, because why the hell would you listen to somebody you believe is at least quote sympathetic with terrorists, right? Then at least take heed on the idea that you can just do this quietly and the numbers will come down, I promise you.
I just don't think they're willing to take on that fight with the media because we know what it would be like, but they're just not strong enough to do it. Cog, hello.
Hello, I have it on good authority that Yvette watches our show with Ed every night. And I'm sure that's definitely the case.
Below the frame of Emmeline Pankhurst in the background, her favorite terrorist.
Favorite terrorist. Oh. So, let's go through some of the comments and I'll ask you for commentary on various ones. The first one needs no commentary. It is from Kevin, just saying, Curtis is a pretty boy in response to the trailer. The trailer obviously has Curtis in it. Just so that we all know, and just so that Kevin gets his moment out there. And then in regards to the first story, about the Gaza concentration camp, Jacqueline said, the strip of land the people of Palestine live in Gaza is already small enough, and now they're expected to move into an even smaller area, SMFH. Is this, I suppose, I think I know what you're going to say in response to this, but I will ask and give you the opportunity to expand. Do you think this is continuation of policy? You know, the Gaza Strip was already a small space. It's now further ghettoization. Do you think that's a fair description?
Well, I mentioned this yesterday on a video that I recorded, which I just suddenly remembered this fact that before October 7th, Gaza was the most densely populated place on Earth. And now the entire population, minus the people that they've killed and those who are missing and buried under the rubble and or in prison, the entire population is now going to get moved into a tiny, tiny strip of land in the tiny strip of land, which will then become still and continue to be the most densely populated place on Earth. So yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. I can't. Helena?
I mean, this was the whole point of Netanyahu allowing Qatar to funnel money to Hamas in the first place. This is the excuse they always wanted, right? They have tried to try and suffocate Gaza over the last 20 years, certainly, and obviously longer as well. And they always wanted there to be a way of ensuring that there was going to be an excuse to do this eventually. And that's why Netanyahu has always been a fan of having militants on his doorstep.
Yeah, I was reading a quote recently. As soon as you said that, I was just trying to find it, which was in 2019. Netanyahu specifically said that we should essentially support. This was in a meeting with ministers and was reported on that he wanted to support funding to the Palestinian Authority because he knew that it got to Hamas because they want the idea of somebody to be the bad guy so that they can continue doing what they're doing. It's even with the recent story of, which is shocking, of them allegedly drugging the flower. It's also nothing new. They have been accused historically of allowing drugs because we know how tight Gaza is, right? In terms of things that go in and out between the IDF, they've been funneling drugs and have been accused of funneling drugs through multiple investigations into the Gaza Strip for years because they just want to do everything that they can to cause chaos in that area so they can continue to find excuses to oppress these people and eventually do what they're doing now, essentially.
Yep, it's always been the case.
And I don't know if I pointed this out on Monday, but last week, all the Likud ministers in Benjamin Netanyahu's party signed a letter saying that they want Netanyahu to annex the entirety of the West Bank by the end of this month because that's the end of the parliamentary session in the Knesset. So we will wait and see what happens. But again, they'll probably just continue getting away with it because in the letter, they specifically mentioned while we have this amount of support from the US, meaning they think they have enough to get through the condemnation of them doing it while also having the backing of Trump. So things could be about to get even worse.
Israel has a right to defend itself, Lewis. That's
Yep.
the line, isn't it? A right to defend
Yep.
itself, something like that.
Yep. And Palestine actually terrorists.
Yeah. So there is another comment here from Verkingtorix. I cannot say that. Verkingtorix, I think. And Vercingetorix said, just shows the control of state that shall not be named has over our government. I just want to push back on this slightly because I think that the best analogy that I've heard, I've forgotten who said it now, but the best analogy that I've heard is that Israel is like an out of control child, right? That it's a spoiled child. That's the sort of like correct dynamic for the way that we should be talking about it. Israel isn't controlling big, European powers. It's not controlling America. It's a relatively small state. But a lot of the military industrial complex influence is funneled through Israel. And so it gets special boy privileges. It gets to get away with things which other countries don't get away with. Would you say this is a kind of fair assessment, either of you?
Yeah, exactly. I 100% agree. Well, who do you think the Palantir are allowed to test their fucking sick creations on? The Palestinians are the lab rats for the military technology contractors for the United States, who are the country that control it, right? Like, if you want to look about a state that has control over our country, it's America. We are America's little bitch boy. We are there. We are in the cuck chair. We are the vassal state. We are being held on a leash by the United States. We do not have power. We are not a powerful country. And it's important to understand as well that all of these people who support Reform UK, all of the Reform UK politicians, that's a situation that they want to make even worse. They want us even more cucked out to America, even more cucked to Trump. That was the whole point of Brexit. But not to take us away from Europe to do anything with Russia. No, it's to get us as close to the United States as possible so we can be part of their fucking disaster capitalist hellscape, right? Those are the real people in charge, and Israel is just their stationary aircraft carrier in the Middle East. In the words of Joe Biden, if they were not in Israel, America would have to invent an Israel to protect their interests in the region.
Pretty much, yeah. And just to add as well, like when it comes to when people talk about like the lobby and the money and why all these organizations exist that support Israel and individuals, you need to understand that as we have been beholden to the US, the idea of supporting Israel is so institutionalized that they have essentially, put in the foundations to make sure that stays there. When people hear about, the quote, I think it is like, oh, Yvette Cooper's taken 200 grand off of the pro-Israel lobby. It's not a case of they've just paid her off and she's just done that. It's not how it works. They want to support candidates and also have their ear, obviously, if and when they can. But that doesn't guarantee them any sort of influence or support. Obviously, it can help. They want to support candidates, not that they can necessarily control, but candidates that they think are going to get into power. So, for example, very simply, because it's more blatantly done in the US, a Democrat who becomes, pro-Palestinian, AIPAC will be like, we're going to fund this candidate who is a Democrat, who is pro-Israel. It doesn't mean they get to control that person. They're just putting money behind a person that they think will be a benefit to their interest. It's not about, controlling them directly in any way. And people need to understand that it's not as simple as these people have just been paid off and that's it, because it doesn't tackle the issue. It doesn't fix anything. To understand how to hopefully one day beat this is to understand how it all actually really works. And there's many layers to it, but it's not just a case of here's some money, ban Palestine action. That's the least of it when it comes to it. Those donations.
Read Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky. It's
Mhm.
worth a look.
And also Ilan Pape's, I think is it just called the Israel Lobby? I think the book's called. I can't remember. Or it's just called the Zionist Lobby. I can't remember what it's called. Ilan Pape, Israeli-born professor who lives and works in the UK.
Yes. So, getting through the next couple of comments, we have more
Also,
comments.
before we move on, I'd like to point out you didn't know what Vercingetorix is. I believe that's a character from Rome Total War.
Oh, yep. No, I am completely ignorant when it comes to anything like that, I'm afraid. But I'm glad, Helena, that you are here to give us that knowledge, because that is well outside my area of expertise, beyond outside of my area of expertise. Although Vercingetorix, I have heard that name before somewhere. I don't know where I've heard that name. When you pronounce it like that, I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Tic Tac said it was the King of Gauls.
King of the Gauls. Right. Yep. Okay. So Kevin said, first of all, David Lammy is a waster, but then slightly more eloquently said Lammy was pretty quick to call Russia's actions in Ukraine a genocide without any court ruling at the time. I think that's something we've all seen, is the distinction between the way that Russia's annexation of Ukraine has been treated compared to Israel's annexation and genocide in Palestine. Jacqueline said, I want Labour to lose those seats, just not to reform. I specifically wanted to ask Helena, how can we best avoid these seats going to reform when Labour lose them, in your opinion?
I mean, especially at the local elections next year, like none of these things are going. Very few of them are going to be Labour reform swing seats. A lot of these are places in London. They're in metropolitan constituencies where reform aren't going to win. Right? We have a balkanised electorate. There's a lot to say on this, so I'm not going to say it all right now. But essentially, the demographic changes and the economic changes have allowed a big shift in terms of young people mostly living in urban areas and old people living in rural areas due to the fact we have a service economy and the fact that house prices are really expensive and the rural living has no jobs. There's a whole thing to go into, but this balkanization has meant the electorate's hyper-polarized between urban and rural areas or urban and suburban areas. So the kind of constituencies, the kind of wards that are going to be up for election, which Labour are in danger of losing, are all in areas that actually Reform are unlikely to win from them. So there's going to be a real feeding ground for the Greens, for independents, and for any kind of potential Corbyn party as well.
Well answered. Well answered. I like that distinction in terms of like what seats are up for grabs at the local elections. Good point. Specs Bean Farmer along those lines said, of course, Labour are still trying to ape reform votes. This is in regards to the last story, after it's been shown not to be electorally viable. Got to love McSweeney's stubbornness. And I think Becca makes a very good point that it does seem like Sir Keesh wants to be the opposite of Corbyn, and that is a fair amount, I think, of what's driving this going forward. Do you think that's the balance of power at the moment is basically they're still trying to define themselves against the left, and this kind of obsession, I guess it comes from like Labour students, is still what's driving them? Is that a fair kind of summary?
I just want to quickly add though, like in terms of like what they're doing in terms of defining themselves away from the left, is that they're not even really good at it, right? They're putting in policies or thinking about putting in policies which only some of the hardest right Tories could have dreamed of, right? And they're not even good at bragging about it. It's like they know what they're doing is the idea of potentially trying to appeal to voters who are never going to vote for them. But at the end of the day, they're not even like owning it, right? They're not, when they're talking about the amount of deportations that they've done, like, Trump brags about it every day, even though let's not get into the numbers. Like they've deported a lot of people objectively in terms of where the previous numbers were. And like they mention it maybe once a month, right? They're not even good at bragging about how they're trying to appeal to people that they're never going to get to vote for them. They don't even own what they're doing. They'll get it through and they barely talk about it. So not only obviously is the policy bad because it's turning away people from the left, but it's not actually going to appeal to anyone on the right because people don't actually really know what they're doing because they don't talk about it that much. I don't know. Am I getting that wrong in any way, Helena? What do you think?
I think, yeah, that's absolutely right. Even the things that they do that they think the population would like and they have polled well, they don't mention to the public that they're doing them. But I think when it comes to migration policy specifically, they're just throwing shit at the walls and seeing what sticks. And then, of course, the numbers will go up and they'll fail. Like, because no one believes them. They'll literally post out, we've done maximum deportation. They go, show me all of the proof. I want videos of the planes flying away before I believe you. And I'm like, well, yeah, no, of course they're not going to believe you. These people are ideologically captured by reform now. Like,
I just feel like if Farage was in power right now, he would be bringing up the numbers every other day. They did put out the video of the deportations and rounding up people, smashing into the houses in the middle of the night. But again, like they haven't really done much of that since then. They've mentioned it once or twice. I just find it really interesting. Like just fucking
the
own it.
comms are
Just own
shit.
it.
Their comms are just terrible. Whoever's in comms at that party is just fucking shit. They're terrible at their job. Like, even the things that they want people to know about that they're doing that I fucking hate, they won't even talk about, right? You'd think they wouldn't waste a chance to rub it in the nose of the Corbynites, but they're too incompetent even for that.
The incompetence is astounding.
Just to quickly point out as well, because I think it's just kind of relevant to the unraveling of Labour. So, listen to the number of MPs. So this has just come out literally minutes ago from Jessica Elgort at Guardian. Labour MPs call on Starmer to focus on radical ideas to lower cost of living, and this is a warning from a group of MPs who wrote in an open letter. 104 of them, very similar to the coalition that formed in terms of the rebellion. The recent rebellion, it seems like they have become emboldened, which is going to potentially get in the way of Labour's policies a lot now that this group has met and formed, and now they have an informal coalition because they don't prescribe to any sort of caucus or anything like that. Yeah, it just seems interesting because I don't know how much Labour's going to be able to get done in terms of going in the direction that we're talking about. Well, they've got 104 MPs who will be able to essentially squash any bill that wants to go through now, which is appealing to those groups of people.
Superb. Okay, just one final comment. We don't need commentary on this one. When Lewis came on and was muted, most people put muted, but not Tic Tac Music. Tic Tac Music put the Silent Warrior, which I thought was fantastic. So with that, I'll hand back over to you, Lewis, to end the show.
Lovely. It's been a great conversation. Some really big stories. I know obviously a lot of the shows recently have obviously focused on Gaza. I don't think anyone's going to complain about that. I just think that there is just so much going on. There's not enough people talking about it, as proven today by the complete lack of coverage of Baroness Helena Kennedy's conversation, which in theory should have been at least in some mainstream news, but it hasn't. And we'll keep trying to balance the domestic with the foreign policy stuff. And if anybody's got any recommendations for anything you'd like us to cover more on the show, please just put it in the chat. We try to want to keep it obviously topical while tying it into some historical stuff as well. But I want to say a big thank you to Helena for joining us today. How long are you going to be streaming for tonight?
Probably a couple of hours usually. I'm streaming with Kevin, so we'll cover PMQs, we'll cover maybe the Doctor Strike, some other videos, something like that. We'll have some fun.
Yeah, there was the moment at PMQs today, the rowdy moment. I don't know, like, I'll get you one more question in. Do you think they're planning this? Because I've seen multiple moments now of PMQs of everyone heckling Farage. Do you think they're trying to like plan this as like some sort of moment that's going to go viral? And it's like, look, we're heckling Farage. It just keeps happening.
Well, he's the leader of the opposition, isn't he? So they've got to do what they've got to do. Kemi who? Kemi
who? Oh, she's gone soon. She is gone soon. And I'm sure we'll cover that in the future. Well, thank you very much. And thank you as well, Cog. We will be we will be back on Friday for the next show. I'm actually not sure who's hosting. I should probably know that, but it'll be a surprise now on Friday. So we will see you then. Thank you again for joining us today. If you do again want to wish to support us at Turn Left, please go to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. And thank you again today for everybody's comments and contributions. We will see you on Friday.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.